President, Senator Mansell. Grateful for him being here, dear friend of mine, and appreciate him leading us off. And now we're ready to go forward. We've got our rules in place, talked about appropriations. Guess now appropriate to discuss any questions that you might have.
What do you see as the priorities this session that you would like to accomplish as in the Senate?
Of course, the budget is a priority, and the initiative is going to be a top priority as far as discussion is concerned. Where we go with that, I'm not sure at this point. It's politically difficult for a legislature to raise taxes, and, but we'll be having discussion with stakeholders and working out maybe what some of the outcomes could be, what kind of thing that they could present to the public. Needs to be a pretty compelling reason for us to even probably consider raising revenue through taxes.
Do you think it's something that will the Senate or will the House, the legislature overall, be able to ward off?
Well, an initiative is it's in the Constitution. The people are also lawmakers, and so if they get enough signatures, that'll be on the ballot, and we support that process and applaud that process.
Would you like to see it get on the ballot?
I really don't have feelings one way or the other. If the legislature could actually come up with a solution that would be something that they could agree to, then I think it would be better for us to deal with it as a legislature.
We live in a republic, which means we have representative government, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is I think one of the big reasons is because we as a legislature, we dedicate 100% of our time during this legislative session. You've seen us dive down into issues in as great a detail as we can possibly do. It's very difficult for everyone in the state to do that. People have jobs and assignments and things they're taking care of. So many times in an initiative process, things do get discussed well, but I'm afraid sometimes there are sound bites and not the deep dive that we can do as a legislature. So if we do something like that, I think it's best served to try to do it through a legislative representative process, but we surely support the initiative process too. But that's I think it's our duty and our responsibility and our obligation to set a budget and to try to manage the financials of the state and let the executive branch execute those.
Senator Davis is here. Thank you for coming, our minority leader. Any big rock issues that you see coming before the legislature this year?
I think one of the things we're going to have to deal with is the issue of homelessness. And it's not just a growing Utah problem. It's a growing problem in California as well as here. And so many states are facing that problem, and we've got to put our arms around that, figure out how we're going to address that issue as well. Part of that, I believe, is making sure that we have access to health care for all citizens.
Senator Oakland?
I think the past couple of years and for the next decade or maybe more, we're going to have to deal with infrastructure issues. As we see the current rate of growth, most of the growth coming from our own families, we're going to double our population over the next 30 years. That means twice as many people who need to get where they need to go. So we're going to have to find a way to get them highways and transportation systems that will be able to handle that. We're going to have to make sure we have water for all of those people. There are just so many congestion issues. You think about clean air. Most of the air pollution comes from our tailpipes. The people that drive, and if we don't find a way to get people where they need to go without having each of them in a car, we're going to have more air quality issues. So a lot of what we're going to be doing, I think, for the next decade or more is going to be dealing with infrastructure issues that's going to make it possible for us to handle this growth, and that includes everything from transportation, water, schools, colleges, everything that's entailed in that growing population.
On the issue of the homelessness, the House certainly the Speaker made a lot of reference to that, but are you anticipating another ask for money. You funded 27 million, but are you expecting that that's not enough?
Well, we don't know for sure. There's been a lot of numbers been thrown out there. We've read it in the press. That's what the session's for, is to drill down and find out what the real story is, and not any dish on the press or anything, but we're gonna drill down, and there needs to be some accountability with those funds too. We wanna see what the program's gonna be. The situation down there by the Rio Grande is, in my opinion, just it's inhumane to see what's going on there, to allow that kind of I've been down there at night, I've been down there in a day, and we need to somehow come up with some kind of a solution. And I like the solution where we split up the populations. We've already moved the families down to Midvale, the single women, and separating those out. I think that will actually create a better environment. And the other thing is the legislature's got to figure out how we're going to fund treatment, because mental illness treatment and substance abuse treatment, what we were trying to do with JRI, is an essential element to us solving that.
Do you support the 4 shelter sites that exist, that the mayor's office has proposed?
Well, I support 4 sites, whether they're in a particular spot, I really don't have a comment on. Senator Stevens is also here. Budget, what do you see for the budget over the next?
Well, we've certainly listened to some of the issues that we need to be looking at to spend some money on, but we've also, this will be a difficult budget year. And it's difficult because we have to go back to 2011 to find a year that has the kind of revenue that we have this year. If you look at it on a per capita basis, we're probably less than we were in 2011. So as a result, we've got some deep digging to do to find some money to spend. And if you look at, I think 285 million is the number we're looking at in new money. It's almost all ongoing money. But when we look at WPU, student growth, we look at modest increases for state employees and their universities, that's pretty well, that goes away very quickly. There's not much there to work with. So it'll be a difficult budget year. We don't have the increases we've had the last 2 years, which have been, we're at 4.5% right now, and I think last year we were about 9.5%, the year before about 11.5% in new money to work with. So you can see where we have a real challenge in front of us.
Are you directing committee chairs to look for cuts in their base budgets?
Absolutely. That's what this first 3 meetings will be for. And we've had staff heavily involved in that to this point.
And you're looking at how much, 3% or 2%?
No, we're not giving any numbers. We've just said, let's get into this and see what we can find.
Okay, but no target for each committee, because I mean, in years past, you just said you're getting 3% haircut and we'll put back what we want at the end.
We've done that in the past, and sometimes that's not been as productive as we would have liked. So
I've heard a lot about this being a bad budget year. This is not a bad budget year, it's a good one. We have revenue growth. Bad budget year is 2009, when we're cutting $500 million, $750 million out of the budget. That's a tough budget year. We have revenue growth, but what I see in the revenue growth now is a normalization of what we can expect. The last couple of years have been extraordinary years, and a normalization of our revenue stream, it does beg the question, do we have the revenue streams in the right place and in the right amounts to meet the infrastructure needs, education needs for a growing population that's going to double over the next 30 years.
And another thing that probably adds to it is that many times we're budgeting it out into the future, so we're trying to estimate what the revenues are going to be. And we've become very good at it. We have, I think, probably some of the best staff in the nation in Utah. They've been nationally recognized, and as the economists look out and look to the future, many times we have, you know, the economy grows faster than what they predict. They hit it right on. In fact, I think there's only $1 million or so, Jerry, you'll have to tell me, Senator Stevenson.
At one time.
In one time. That means we budgeted exactly almost what we spent. That's very hard to do, but it also doesn't leave a lot of one-time money, which we typically use for buildings or those type of things. So that adds to the fact. And it's not that the economy isn't growing. I think we're going between 5 and 8% in revenue, but it's just that we estimated very well.
You need to take a look also at the exemptions that we have. We've taken a lot of money off of the table that should be there for us to be able to look at in growth. And so we need to take a look at that also. And
Broaden the
find
basis.
those monies that could help us grow even better.
Other questions?
What do you think about the women's marches that have taken place in Utah and then the one that's going to take place today up to the Capitol? Just about their message and how many people have shown up and things like that.
Well, we support, it's a great thing about our country to be able to express, have free speech. As long as you're not interfering with somebody's real property or being violent, that's what America's about. We support that 100%, and so we applaud those who want their voice to be heard.
What message will you take from that march, though? These are women that are worried about what's going to happen in Washington with the new administration as far as not just women's rights, but all kinds of rights. What will you hear from this group? What message are you taking from this as lawmakers? They're coming up now to talk to you, not just the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot to necessarily do with the Trump administration. Mr. Trump was elected by the people last year and is now our president. We respect him and we honor the office. And so what we're hearing today is we'll take those things into consideration here, but if they're concerned about what's happening in Washington, I think the protest should be in a place where it's going to be heard in Washington. In my speech today and opening remarks, I applauded the efforts of 100 years ago in women's suffrage, and we've come a long way. And Utah led that out and led that effort. And so I think that we've been very progressive as a state in acknowledging women and their rights and their ability to govern and being part of the process.
As the president talked about in his remarks today, that Utah's led, and both in women's voting and in the first state senator in the nation was in Utah.
Mm-hmm. Martha Hughes Cannon.
And we've recently even done some anti-discrimination, religious liberties legislation that's led out on that issue and led the country. So Utah's not afraid to lead, and they'll probably listen and react accordingly.
I think one of the issues that they're marching on that we could do something about, and that is equal pay for equal work. That's an issue that we should take to heart and address as a state. I think as the president has indicated that he wants to return more power to the states and oversight to the states, it's one of those things that we need to look at and making sure that women have choices to make and are treated equally.
We have Senator Henderson here as our new rules chair. Any bills, what do you see for the session as far as issues coming up? What you're seeing as far as the Rules Committee is concerned?
Well, we have 106 numbered bills and resolutions in the Senate right now. We just had our first Rules Committee meeting. We'll be taking a couple dozen of those that were what looked to be non-controversial, unanimous interim committee bills and putting those straight over to the second reading calendar today. We'll also be perhaps making motions on the easy ones to send straight across the board, get them over to the House, so the House has some Senate bills to work on, and we're not slowing down the process too much here in the Senate. We also have a bunch of bills that will be assigned to committees this afternoon.
Any comments you have on the march today?
Well, I echo your comments, President. I appreciate and value free speech. I believe in equal rights, absolutely. I believe in equal rights, and I think everybody up here does. Do we have ways that we can make things a little bit better and a little bit easier? Yeah, absolutely. There are some things that we can do. I'll be interested to see what the women today have to say. I don't really know what it is they're marching about, so I can't really comment on that necessarily, specifically. But I think all voices need to be heard. I think of the women in our state history, in our past, who went nationally and spoke for and fought for and defended women's rights to vote all around the country. While they themselves here at home had that right and had had it for a very long time. So I think Utah does lead out on these issues. I think, is there room for improvement? Of course, absolutely. There's always room for improvement, but I'm very proud of our state. I'm proud of our history, and I'll listen to what the women have to say today.
Thank you.
Senator, just really quickly, do you know how many bill requests have been made so far in the legislature?
I think, Senator Okerlund, you said 1,500?
Close to 15, it looks like we're gonna hit 1,500 before it closes down, which is a large amount of bills filed.
Could be a record.
Is that
Could be a record. We've already passed the
and
record.
your thoughts on that then? I mean, 1,500 bills this session?
Didn't our rolling of our eyes send that message?
You can't read that.
Thank goodness a lot of the work, as Senator Henderson mentioned, is done during interim on a lot of these bills. And we have really charged our interim committees to look closely at items that we think are important. And we have prioritized, the President and the Speaker have prioritized issues to go before our interim committee so that they can take a real good look at some of the issues that have been important that we haven't gotten to, or others that we see coming down the road. So a lot of work has been done in the interim. Thank goodness we'll be able to move fairly quickly on those bills as they come to the Senate. But obviously there are lots of ideas and bills that we'll be trying to work our way through, and we don't get to all of them. You just can't get to that many bills in 45 days. So we'll be trying to figure out how we can get through as many of the important issues as we can.
It's free speech on steroids.
Yeah.
So, and thankfully, we'll probably pass 450 to 500 of those bills.
Given that number, does a part-time legislature still work for the state of Utah, do you think? Or should we look at maybe a different model?
I don't know if anybody in the legislature would advocate anything more than what we have. The citizen legislature model is the best model I've seen around the country. I get to rub shoulders with Senate presidents from across the country. And this model of going home after a short session and facing the voters and actually having a job that you work in, and we have a diversity of employment here represented in the legislature, from teachers to real estate people, to attorneys, to insurance. And so it really is a pretty diverse legislature. And having that experience, that commitment to community and to the workforce really benefits us. So the citizenship model, great model, and keeping it short is also a great model, because if you extend our session, we'll just pass more bills. And we need that window of 45, 46 days to deal with the issues that come before us every year. But we're pretty good at prioritizing, and we get past what needs to be passed, but there's a lot of things that can wait or don't need to be passed.
Will that change as the state population continues to grow, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, look at Texas. They have a biannual legislature, and while they meet for, it's probably 90 at least days biannually, that's a big state, 25 million people, and they handle it very well. I don't see any reason for us to change even with a growing population.
There's significant wisdom of having to live with the laws you pass. We have doctors, nurses, as the president talked about it, we have a pretty broad representation in the legislature, and that brings expertise, and it also brings responsibility when you have to live with the things you pass.
Yeah, I'm always glad when our doctors show up.
That's right. I was gonna
It's
remind
really
you.
helped.
President, can you talk a little more about this call for people to get involved in sharing their concerns about the power of the federal government? What do you expect to come of that? You said that you and the speaker were going to convene the federalism committee to take input, but what do you really expect to happen? Do you think with a President Trump in the White House, a state like Utah could really influence movement in that direction?
Well, I was challenged by our federal delegation, not every one of them, Representative Chaffetz, Representative Bishop, to provide them a list of things that they could work on, unfunded mandates, overreaches of the federal government. And I want to accommodate that. Any chance, even though it might be a small chance, I want to lay it at their feet and see if they can do something about it. And so I'm excited about that challenge. And we're already working on it internally. There's legislators that have a lot of different ideas, but I wanted to expand that. I want the people, if they know of some things, bring them to the legislature. Let us consider them and add them to the list. Let's talk to our departments and our divisions in the executive branch. Let's broaden that and bring those ideas together, those things that are really a hardship for us, things that we can do better here on a state level. And I want to provide a list to Congress to see, and the President to see if they'll act on that.
What's the time frame?
We don't know exactly what the time frame will be, but I'm hoping that within, by the time the legislature adjourns sine die, that we have that list.
I'm hopefully optimistic of the influence we may have on that process. As I looked at the press reports of the first act I think the President made, I think it was actually signing the declaration. The Senate met that day and confirmed two of his cabinet members. And standing next to the President, the new President Trump, was a fellow named Rob Porter. Behind him was the obvious Chief of Staff. But Rob's, everybody knows him, a lot of people know him, but he was the former Chief of Staff for Senator Hatch. And to have him standing next to the President, the overall Oval Office, controlling most of the work that's done there, is a great opportunity for Utah. We have other people that are strategically placed, and we may have some influence, and hopefully we will, and we'll try to exert all the influence we can. The idea is that the states really are the spot where this work ought to be done. And I'm hearing that President Trump is listening to that, and I think there's some comments he's making that may help facilitate the fact that states are really where the work ought to be done.
So you think Utah will be listened to, even though Trump did not have a level of support here? A Republican would normally expect. He won by the smallest majority.
It appears we are. I mean, I looked at the program that was at the at the inauguration, and we have great talent in the state of Utah. We had the Tabernacle Choir that sang just before he was confirmed, or before he did the oath of office. We've had piano guys back there. We've had Lexi Walker, we talked about earlier. We've had, people are participating on both in the arts and in the program, and I think also politically. I think Utah will have an influence. It's obviously we do.
We have a couple questions
Okay.
from Twitter.
Great.
The first one is, how will you ensure Utah is prepared for climate change? How will you encourage renewable energy?
Well,
Utah for the past several years has had renewable energy tax credits. We have been encouraging renewable energy in the state of Utah, as well as traditional energy development. I believe that we're going to need all that we can get as we see what's happening in this area. And we've seen tremendous solar farms being built down in my district, down in the southern part of the state. We've had these huge wind farms that have been developed down in the southern part of the state. and they are producing energy and putting it on the grid. We think that's really important. The fact of the matter is, we are going to need our traditional energy sources well into the future, for the next 20 to 30 years, to be able to meet our needs. So, but the important thing to understand there on these issues is the air is being polluted by all of us. It's not just something that comes out of a smokestack. Most of the air pollution that we see comes from our tailpipes. Each one of us contributes to that. If we get to the point where we can go to Tier 3 fuels in the state of Utah and have the vehicles to be able to burn those Tier 3 fuels, it will do more good than all of the other things that we can do. We can do a lot of little things that make us feel good about climate change, but the fact of the matter is, when we really deal with air quality issues, we have to be able to control what comes out of our own tailpipes, and that means cleaner burning fuels. It means being able to carpool. It means mass transit wherever we can. All of those things are going to be important. The climate is always going to change. Doesn't matter what we do, the climate 10 years from now is going to be different than it was 10 years ago. And so climate change is going to happen. How much influence we as humans have on that is still being trying to be figured out, and we're very interested in that and how we can help. And we have been, for the past several sessions, doing a lot of things to try to make that situation better. But the fact of the matter is, it kind of comes back to each one of us. The legislature can only do so much. Each one of us have to be able to control our own use of vehicles and the emissions, and our own homes that put out pollution, and our businesses. All of those things contribute. So we are very much interested in renewable fuels, and have been encouraging them for a number of years, and we'll continue to.
Thank you very much.
How are you going to encourage or enforce the individual to take care of the individual air quality? What are your plans with that?
Well, we need to get that word out. That's the most important thing we can do, is to get the word out to people that each one of our actions, everything that we do, we should be thinking a little bit about, and how it affects the air that we breathe. And I live down in Monroe, so the air's great all the time down there. And the Wasatch Front has these huge accumulations of people, and these valleys that are surrounded by these mountains. It's natural for us to have inversions and to trap the pollution and the air quality down close to the ground. So we have to deal with that. And as we see the growth that we're going to see over the next couple of decades, more people are going to create more of it, unless we do a better job individually of trying to control those emissions. So I think it's something we have to educate the public on. We've been involved in that. We've helped with the UCare movement to try to get some good information out. We've participated in funding for commercials. You'll see the ones where they're talking about turning your thermostat down a little bit, or carpooling. There's a lot of messages out there. We've been trying to help with that. So those are important, and we'll continue to do that. I think one of the greatest things we can do as we see this growth is try to get it a little bit off the Wasatch Front, where the air is not, where we don't have air quality issues. You get a few businesses to start building down in the southern part of the state, the central part of the state. We move the traffic out of the Wasatch Front. We move some of the air problems out of the Wasatch Front. And we really help those struggling rural economies that are not keeping up with the rest of the state with the economic growth that we're having. So those are a couple of things that we can do that I think are very good solutions.
Next question.
Another question from online is, what are you doing to ensure all students in Utah have access to good public schools?
Big issue that we deal with every year. Want to take that one on, Senator Adams?
Absolutely. There's no question that education is the most important issue. I think we've already talked about that here. And I believe education is part of our infrastructure. The fact that people need a good education not only helps the public, but actually helps self-esteem. The education budget is the biggest part of our budget. One statistic that most people don't understand, and we had the superintendent from, I believe, Indiana here a few years ago and talked about Indiana was the top state in the nation as far as percent of budget spent on education. But I was amazed to see in his graph that Utah was number 5. And I about fell off my chair because we hear about the spending we have in Utah in education. But as far as percent of budget, education at that point in time, that snapshot in time, was we were 5th in the nation. So our commitment to education is very high. The challenge is that we have a very high birth rate. And I think we'll continue to focus on it. We talked about ways earlier that we might do, but it'll consume a lot of our time here.
I think to improve our schools, the one thing that we need to do is we've got to turn things around to where we look at teachers as being professionals. And we've got to start treating them like professionals. They aren't creating widgets in the classroom, they're teaching. And teaching is a very difficult subject. I know I've been in the classroom, I've tried to teach classes. I'm not a teacher, and we're not all teachers. Only certain people have that ability to really communicate with the classroom and in a classroom setting. We've got to do more to encourage young people to get into the teaching profession, and then we have to reward them for doing that.
Ally, wish you were back.
Actually, I'm just sitting here thinking how nice it is I don't have to answer it. But you know, the most interesting part, the questions are identical.
Yeah, they are.
If we were doing this 15 years ago, the questions would not be any different. So congratulations, you're still working on it.
No, that's
Thank you for
encouraging or
that
not.
perspective. One last question, anything?
I have one.
Okay.
Considering education, is there a possibility of raising taxes when it comes to education?
As I mentioned right at the start with Ben's comment, what we saw was the Big Rock issues. This is a different, raising taxes is a monumental task for the legislature. We did it 2 years ago though, and raising the gas tax and $75 million for education and the property tax. Those were huge steps for the legislature. Taking a $500 million or $750 million dollar step, not a lot of chance, I think, in legislature taking that big of a leap. But if people can be patient and we can deal with it incrementally, I think the legislature could do that over time.
Because I know we talked about finding new money. What are your plans to find that new money that's needed?
Well, you know, with the initiative and the revenue, without the initiative, the revenue growth that we're experiencing has been sufficient for what we've been able to, has been sufficient for the budget and for the growth. And we've added to education $1.5 billion over the last 6-7 years. So that wasn't much of a consideration on our mind. We're concerned about the infrastructure of the future, and do we have the revenue streams that are sufficient to provide that infrastructure. We're concerned about that. That's why we acted 2 years ago. I think the legislature could get to some incremental approach potentially this session, but a wholesale change, very difficult for a political body to do that.
I think one of the things we need to look at is the fact that we adopted a 5% flat tax a number of years ago. That flat tax is now, its rate is 3.8%, its effective rate. We can bring that back up to 5% just by looking at exemptions and deductions and everything else that we have in there. And that could return us to a true flat tax. And at that point, I think then we don't have to raise taxes.
There are some encouraging things going on. Everybody heard of the announcement about Amazon. A lot of our habits are changing, and we're buying more on the internet. Again, we talked earlier, those internet taxes have not been, we have an obligation to pay them. Not a lot of people are adding that to their income tax and paying them when they file their returns. So to see it actually be agreed upon by Amazon to collect those taxes, that'll be a new revenue stream. And there's other new revenue streams that may come, but part of it is just our consumer habits that I think we need to evaluate and find out what the options are there. We removed the sales tax off of food a few years ago, And sales tax is very volatile. Furniture, car sales go up in a good economy, down in a bad economy. There's a lot of volatility in the sales tax. There may be ways to look at trying to bring stabilization there too. But lots of big issues, and that'll be part of it.
Thanks everyone for being here, and we want to
Thank you.
recognize Ben Winslow's socks. For your patriotic socks
He
today.
looks like Republican.
Oh, partisan socks.
He's making socks for you.
Hey,